Howdy folks, welcome back for another Feature Friday. I'm your host Ryan Glover, and this week we're going to be focused on a very tiny feature. So one of my hands down favorite things to do in an interface is to automate the height of an input, and specifically a text area. So one of the things you'll see in a UI is you have a text area input, so that's the multi-line input where you can type in a few paragraphs of text. But often something that a lot of developers leave out is they won't make that input expand with the height of your content. And unfortunately, browsers aren't designed to automatically do this for you. So what I'm going to teach you in this Feature Friday is how to build that automatic resizing feature into your input. And it sounds like something that's really complicated, but it's actually quite easy once you see what the solution is. So what we're going to do is write a reusable function, and we can attach that to the instance of an input in our UI or a text area in our UI. And as the user types, once their text passes the height or the default height of that input, what we can do is we can automate the expansion of the height of the input. So again, this is going to be a real quick one, but it's an excellent little tool to have on your belt, and it's a great way to make really nice products for all of the users of your own products. So I hope you enjoy, and if you're ready, let's get started. A lot of my time over the past week has been focused on Command, the first SaaS product that's coming out from Clever Beagle sometime in the next few months. And specifically what I've been working on is the new card modal. So inside of Command, you're going to be able to track work on your product as one of 5 card types. And so inside of this modal, one of the features that I've added is the ability to track notes. So you can write down what you need to work on, but you can also add some additional notes just to add context to the work that you're doing. And specifically with this input, one of the things that I ran into was that I realized you might want to type a lot of stuff in here. You might have a lot of notes about what it is that you're trying to build. And what I realized was that as I was starting to type into this thing, it was doing this scroll bar nonsense over on the right. So if I clear that out and type some text, and I'll just copy and paste this again and again. As that text starts to get past the initial height of the input, what happens is the browser just starts to scroll that input. And while this is certainly functional, it's not the best user experience because it starts to make it difficult to go back and reference what the user had typed in before. Now, on the surface, it may sound like this is a really difficult problem to solve, but it's shockingly simple to fix this. So what I want to do is jump into the code here and show you how I've put this together. So what I've got highlighted here is the composer component inside of Command, and that's what's rendering this text area input. So what we're going to do is look into that component. So right now I'm inside of the new card modal component, but we want to focus just on composer. So if we go into composer, you can notice that I've got a text area that's making up that composer. Now, I have grand ambitions for this composer component. That's why it's its own separate component file. But for now, all it is just a text area. So inside of here, I've got a text area, and this is coming from Fur, which is the UI kit that I'm working on for Clever Beagle, kind of simultaneously while I'm building Command. So that's also going to be coming out this year, and that's going to be free just like Pup is. And so everything that you see in front of you with Command is being built on top of Pup and Fur. So all of the same tooling that will be free to you or is already free to you, I'm using that to build my own stuff. So it's a neat way I gotta get the joke in, it's a neat way to dog food everything that I'm building here. So again, back down here I've got the form.text area component from Fur. And you'll notice that I've commented out this onChange handler. So what I'm going to do is turn this on. And what I want to show you is what the desired behavior is. And then we're going to go into this function here. We're going to look at the internals of set input height and wrap our heads around how exactly that's working to do what it does. So back here in the browser, if I go back to new card and I start pasting some text into the input, what you'll notice is that now that input's height is scaling with my text. I'm not having to scroll in that input at all. It's just automatically doing the set of the height on that input for me, which is really, really nice. So instead of having to scroll back to the first few lines of content that I typed in as a user, I can see everything in scope at once, which solves a huge number of problems. It helps me to understand whether I'm being too much of a blabbermouth, or it helps me to connect ideas that I'd written earlier in my notes with what I'm currently writing, and a whole bunch of other potential problems that come up from obscuring that text behind a scroll bar. It's not really that clean. So that's the desired effect. And so what we need to do is look at this set input height function. And you'll notice here, what I'm doing is calling this on the onChange event of that text area. So quite literally, as the user is changing that input or typing into that input, this function is being called here, this anonymous function, which is then calling to set input height. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want to take in that event from the onChange handler and pass it to set input height. If we open up set input height, what we're going to see is that that event is taken in as an argument called elements. We take in two arguments inside of set input height. We've got element and we've got default height. So if we look back at our definition here, we've got set input height taking in an event, and then we can see in a string 100 px or 100 pixels. So back inside of set input height, what we're saying is if we have an element, we want to go ahead and run this code. And this code, again, is very simple. So what we're saying here is in a variable called target, if we have element.target, so element is set up to be either a raw DOM event that's going to have a target on it, or it's set up to support a regular DOM node passed to us via something like a React ref. So this is a nice little two-in-one system here. This isn't limiting us to just one form of selecting a DOM element. We can pass either a raw DOM event or we can pass the raw DOM element, and we'll still be pointing at the same thing. So notice here target is saying, using a ternary operator, if element.target exists, and .target is going to exist if what we've passed for element is a JavaScript event. So if there's a target, go ahead and rely on that. Otherwise, fall back to whatever element is. So in this case, if there's not a target, we know that it's just a static reference to a DOM element. And again, that could be via a React ref, or you could just say something like dom.querySelector, or excuse me, document.querySelector, and the value that you get back from that call is going to be equal to element. So the punchline here is that we get back whatever that element is as the target in our variable here. And then the first thing that we do is we say set the height of that element to the default height we've passed for the second argument. So here we've got 100 pixels. And the reason that we're doing this is so that as the user's changing the input, we make sure to account for whether or not they've deleted everything from the input as well. And the reason we have to do that is because if you consider what's going on here, we're effectively changing the height of that element as it exists in the browser. So this is a permanent change to that element while it's rendered on screen. And so in this case, if I get rid of all this dummy text in here and we look at the height of this input, it's pretty much, yeah, it's exactly 100 pixels tall. So what I'm saying here is if the user goes backwards or deletes everything from the input, go ahead and set it back to whatever its default height was. So in this case, it's 100 pixels tall. We want to set it back to that. And so if I was to say that a different way, maybe you have an input that's this tall, and I think this is somewhere in the like 40 to 45 pixel range. If you had an input that was that tall, you would set your default height value. So in here, instead of 100 pixels, you would put something like 45. So that way, if the user expanded it to be some crazy height like this, but then backed up and deleted everything, it would preserve its original height and not break your UI later. It would preserve the original height of this one based on that example. So back in here, what we can see is after we've set that default height, we go and we set the height again, but this time we set it to target.scrollHeight with px on the end. So what we're doing here is we're trying to set the height of the target, or the height of the element, equal to its current scroll height. So scroll height is a property that we're going to get from the browser, or better said is from the element itself, if that element has some sort of scroll feature. So in this case, a text area is going to have a scroll if the content of that text area expands past its default or stated height. So the stated height in CSS, or the default height that that text area took on from something like the default browser style sheet. But however it gets it, that scroll height is going to be set back to the height. So quite literally, in this case, as let's go back here in the browser, we'll say typing some stuff in. If I copy and paste this a bunch of times, so I'm typing, I've now changed the scroll height of this input. And so what happens then is I'm setting the height of the input back to or equal to its scroll height. So if I got rid of that, again, we'd see the scroll bar. So this scroll bar height, it's actually kind of convenient. We can see it if I start wiggling the mouse. So we can see that scroll height here. That height is now equal to the height on the container, or the height on the input. So if we go ahead and inspect here, what I'm going to do is show you. So we can see we've got our text area, and we're getting a height of about 140 pixels. And so if I start changing the content here, we'll notice, okay, so it starts to shift a little bit. And we can see it in real time changing. So that's what we're doing, is we're saying match that scroll height, or actually say that in reverse, match the height of the input back to whatever that scroll height is. So that's it. That's literally all we need to do to get that really nice auto resizing input inside of our product. So like I said, this wasn't a very long one or a very complex one, but man, if it isn't one of the nicest details that you can add to your product and really make users happy in the process, so they're not having to scroll around your UI and lose context of what they were typing. So that's going to do it for this Feature Friday. Like I've mentioned before, if you haven't already, make sure to hit the subscribe button on our channel. And if you're really excited about these and you're enjoying them, make sure to hit the bell so that way you're getting notified as soon as I put them out. So that's going to do it for this week. And again, thank you for watching, and we will see you next week for another Feature Friday.